At our BBQ, Stepmom laughed, "Freeloader, hand over your bonus or get out." The next morning, I moved into my own house. I called them. "Let's see you pay the mortgage now." They screamed. 7 days later, 45 missed calls. My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and if you saw me walking down the street in downtown Los Angeles, you would probably think I had my entire life perfectly figured out. I wear tailored blazers, carry a briefcase that costs more than my first car, and I manage marketing budgets that have more zeros than I care to count. I am a senior marketing analyst at a top-tier advertising agency. My days are filled with high-stakes pitch meetings, dissecting consumer data, and convincing multi-million-dollar brands to trust me with their public image. I am exceptionally good at what I do. In the glass-walled conference rooms of my agency, my voice commands respect. People lean in when I speak. But that is only one side of my life. That is the armor I put on every single morning to survive the corporate world. The absolute truth, the grim reality that I hide from my colleagues, my clients, and even my closest friends, begins the moment I step out of the office building and get into my car. The 45-minute drive from the glittering skyline of downtown LA to the quiet, sprawling suburbs of the San Fernando Valley is a daily descent into a reality I never chose, yet somehow ended up completely funding. When I pull into the driveway of the 2-story suburban house with the perfectly manicured lawn, the confident, successful Clara vanishes into thin air. I become a ghost in my own residence. I become the silent, unappreciated engine that keeps the lights on, the water running, and the heavy mortgage paid. I become the family ATM. To understand how I ended up here, trapped in a golden cage of my own financing, you have to understand where I started. It was not always like this. Once upon a time, my childhood was quiet, ordinary, and incredibly safe. It was just me and my dad, Henry. My biological mother packed her bags and left us when I was just 16 years old. She decided she wanted a completely different life, one that did not include a moody teenager and a suffocating suburban mortgage. Her sudden departure broke something deep inside my dad, but it also bonded us together in a way that I honestly thought was unbreakable. For a long while, we were a solid team. Henry was a good man back then. He was hardworking, attentive, and doing his absolute best to navigate the messy waters of single parenthood. We would sit on the back porch on warm summer evenings, eating cheap takeout food and talking about my big dreams. I wanted to go to a good college. I wanted to make a name for myself in the big city. He promised me he would do everything in his power to help me get there. I believed him completely. I loved him with that fierce, protective loyalty that only a child of a broken home can truly understand. I thought our bond was the solid foundation of my life. I did not realize it was just a fragile structure, waiting for a massive storm to come and tear it all down. I was the parentified child, constantly trying to fix his broken heart, constantly trying to be the perfect daughter so he wouldn't feel the pain of my mother's absence. And, because of that deep-seated need to protect my father, I was completely blind to the warning signs. That devastating storm eventually came, and it came in the form of a woman named Diana. Act 1, Part 1.2, The Invasion. Diana, word count target, 650 words. I was barely 17 when Henry met Diana. He was vulnerable, lonely, and desperate for affection. She was 12 years younger than him, flashy, loud, and commanded a room simply by walking into it. They met at some local community event, and within what felt like 5 minutes, they were completely inseparable. To say it was a whirlwind romance would be the understatement of the century. 6 months after their very first date, they were married. I tried to be happy for him. I really did. But the day Diana moved into our quiet little house, she brought an absolute hurricane with her. She didn't come alone. She brought her 2 daughters from a previous marriage. Haley was 12 at the time, and Jade was 10. Suddenly, my peaceful, 2-person sanctuary was overrun by strangers. The invasion was swift and entirely unapologetic. I vividly remember coming home from high school one Tuesday afternoon to find my bedroom door wide open. My posters had been ripped off the walls. My books were thrown into cardboard boxes in the hallway. Diana was standing in the middle of my room, directing a handyman on where to install 2 twin beds for her daughters. When I asked what was going on, my heart pounding in my throat, Diana just smiled a perfectly plastic smile. She told me that since Haley and Jade were younger, they needed the bigger room to share. I was being moved to the tiny, cramped guest room at the end of the hall. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to step in, waiting for him to defend my space, my sanctuary. But Henry just stared at the floor, rubbed the back of his neck, and mumbled something about how we all needed to make sacrifices for our new family. That was the exact moment Henry changed. He went from being my protector to being a conflict-avoidant shell of a man who would do absolutely anything to keep his younger, demanding wife happy. Over the next few years, I watched my father shrink. Diana dictated everything. She completely redecorated the house, throwing away my childhood memories to make room for expensive, uncomfortable modern furniture. She enrolled her daughters in expensive extracurricular activities while telling me I needed to get a part-time job to pay for my own college applications. I put my head down, worked double shifts at a local diner, studied until 2 in the morning, and eventually got myself into a great university. I couldn't wait to escape. The day I moved out to live in a tiny, overpriced college dorm, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I spent my early 20s building my career, finding my own voice, and creating a life that had absolutely nothing to do with Diana, Haley, or Jade. I thought I was free. I really thought I had outrun the shadow of my childhood home. Fast forward a few years. I was 28 years old, living happily in a cool, independent apartment in Silver Lake. I was climbing the corporate ladder, making decent money, and finally feeling like a real adult. Then, on a random Tuesday night, my phone rang. It was Henry. He didn't say hello. He just started crying. The sound of my father sobbing over the phone paralyzed me. Through broken sentences and heavy breaths, he confessed the ugly truth. His small business had completely failed. He was buried in debt. Diana had maxed out every single credit card to her name on luxury vacations and designer clothes that they absolutely could not afford. The bank had sent a final notice. They were facing immediate foreclosure. They were going to lose the house, the only home I had ever known before Diana ruined it. He begged me for help. He said he was drowning. He promised, with absolute desperation in his voice, that if I could just come home and help with the mortgage for a few months, he would get a new job, get back on his feet, and pay me back every single dime. I paced my apartment for hours that night. Every logical bone in my body screamed at me to say no. I knew Diana was reckless. I knew Haley and Jade were spoiled brats. But the sound of my father's tears echoed in my head. This was the man who taught me how to ride a bicycle. This was the man who sat up with me when I had a fever as a child. The twisted loyalty of the parentified child kicked in. I convinced myself that I was strong enough to handle it. I told myself it would only be temporary. I broke my apartment lease. I packed up my beautiful, independent life and moved all my belongings back into that cramped, depressing guest room in the San Fernando Valley. I remember the very first month I was back. Sitting at the kitchen table, I pulled out my checkbook. I wrote out a check for $2,000 to cover the entire mortgage payment. I handed it to my father. He looked at it, his eyes welling up with tears again, and hugged me tightly. He whispered that I was his savior. He promised it was just for 3 months. Just 3 months to stop the bleeding. I felt a sickening twist in my gut as I watched him hand that check over to Diana, who didn't even look up from her phone to say thank you. I should have known then. I should have packed my bags and driven right back to Silver Lake. But I stayed. And that was the biggest, most expensive mistake of my entire life. 3 months came and went. Then 6 months. Then a year. My temporary favor slowly morphed into a permanent, suffocating reality. By the time I turned 33, I had been trapped in that house for 5 excruciating years. I was no longer just helping out. I was the sole financial pillar holding up a roof over the heads of 4 adults. I paid the $2,000 monthly mortgage. I paid the electricity bill, which was always sky high because Diana refused to turn off the air conditioning, even in December. I paid the water bill. I paid the high-speed internet. I even ended up paying the car insurance for the massive SUV that Diana insisted she needed for her errands. While I was draining my bank account and working 50-hour weeks at the marketing agency, the rest of the house lived in a state of luxurious delusion. Haley was now 28 years old, and Jade was 26. Neither of them had a real job. Haley claimed she was finding herself at the local community college, a journey that apparently required dropping out of classes every single semester. One afternoon, Haley came into the kitchen while I was making a cheap sandwich for dinner. She put on a sad face and told Henry she desperately needed $1,500 to pay for her new semester's textbooks and a special laptop required for a graphic design course. Henry looked at me with those pathetic, pleading puppy dog eyes. I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to fight. I transferred the $1,500 into Haley's account. 2 days later, during my lunch break at the office, I opened Instagram. Haley's story popped up. There she was, standing in the VIP section of a very exclusive club in West Hollywood, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was wearing a brand new sequin dress. There were no textbooks. There was no laptop. She had taken my hard-earned money and literally drank it. When I got home that night, my blood was boiling. I slammed my phone down on the dining table right in front of Henry and Diana. I showed them the video. I demanded an explanation. Diana didn't even flinch. She took a sip of her wine, rolled her eyes, and sighed dramatically. "Oh, calm down, Clara," Diana sneered. "She's young. She needs to network. Besides, you make plenty of money. Don't be so greedy with your family." I looked at Henry. "Dad, are you going to say something?" She lied to my face and stole $1,500 from me. Henry stared at his hands. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "Clara, please," he mumbled softly. "Don't start a fight. It's already done. Let's just keep the peace." Keeping the peace. That was his favorite phrase. It meant I had to swallow my anger, open my wallet, and let them walk all over me so he wouldn't have to deal with Diana screaming. I walked back to my tiny guest room, locked the door, and cried out of sheer frustration. I was funding a circus, and I was the biggest clown in the tent. The financial drain was terrible, but the daily microaggressions were what truly slowly killed my spirit. It was the death by 1,000 paper cuts. I would drag myself into the house at 9 o'clock at night after a brutal day of client negotiations. I would be so exhausted my bones ached. I would stand in the kitchen, boiling a 50-cent pack of instant noodles for dinner, trying to save every penny I could. And while I stood there eating my cheap noodles over the sink, I would notice the brand new, imported marble countertops Diana had just installed. She had used the money that I freed up by paying the mortgage to finance a completely unnecessary kitchen remodel. The contrast was sickening. I was wearing shoes with worn-out soles, while Jade was receiving packages from expensive designer boutiques every other day. I was budgeting my gas money, while Diana booked weekend spa retreats for herself and her daughters. One Saturday morning, the tension finally snapped over something incredibly stupid: milk. I had done the grocery shopping the night before, carefully using coupons and buying store-brand items to keep the costs down. Diana opened the refrigerator, pulled out the gallon of regular milk, and slammed it down on the counter. "What is this?" she demanded, glaring at me from across the kitchen. "It's milk, Diana," I said tiredly, not looking up from my laptop where I was trying to finish a weekend work report. "It's not organic," she snapped, her voice rising to that shrill pitch I had come to hate. "You know Haley has a sensitive stomach. We only drink the organic, grass-fed almond milk from the specialty store. How many times do I have to tell you?" I slowly closed my laptop. "Diana, that specialty milk is $8 a carton. This was $3. I paid the electricity bill yesterday, and it was $400 because you leave all the lights on. We are on a budget." Diana let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "We? You mean you are just being stingy? You walk around here in your fancy little suits, acting like you're the queen of the castle just because you pay a few bills. You have no idea how to take care of a real family. A few bills." The audacity of her words literally took my breath away. I was paying for the roof over her head, the food in her mouth, and the electricity running the refrigerator she was currently standing in front of. But in her twisted mind, because I refused to buy $8 almond milk, I was the villain. I was the terrible, greedy stepdaughter. I looked over at Henry, who was sitting on the couch pretending to read a newspaper, completely ignoring the screaming match happening 10 feet away from him. He was a coward. And I was entirely alone. The only place I felt like a human being was at the office. Work became my ultimate sanctuary. It was the only environment where my efforts actually yielded positive results, where my intelligence was respected, and where I wasn't treated like a walking checkbook. A lot of that had to do with my boss, Julian. Julian was a sharp, no-nonsense marketing director in his late 40s. He was tough, demanding, but incredibly fair. He saw my potential early on and pushed me to take on bigger, riskier projects. Under his mentorship, I thrived. That spring, I spearheaded a massive billboard advertising campaign for a new indie film studio. I poured my soul into it. I worked late nights, weekends, analyzing demographic data until my eyes blurred. When the campaign finally launched, it was an absolute smash hit. It went viral across social media. The client was thrilled, the agency's revenue spiked, and Julian called me into his office to personally congratulate me. He told me I was brilliant. He told me I had a huge future. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of pride. I felt like I actually mattered. I was riding that high all the way home on the freeway. I couldn't wait to tell my dad. Despite everything, that little girl inside me still craved her father's approval. I wanted him to be proud of me. We were all sitting around the dining table that evening. Henry, Diana, Haley, Jade, and me. Diana had ordered expensive sushi for dinner, which she graciously allowed me to pay for when the delivery guy arrived. As we ate, I cleared my throat. "So, I had a really amazing day at work today," I started, a genuine smile breaking across my face. That huge campaign I've been managing for the last 3 months finally launched. It's all over the city. The client actually called the agency owner to praise my specific strategy. Julian said it's the most successful launch we've had this year. I paused, waiting for a reaction. Waiting for a "good job" or a "we are so proud of you." Instead, there was dead silence. The only sound was Haley chewing her spicy tuna roll. Diana didn't even look at me. She turned her head entirely, focusing her attention on Jade. "Oh, by the way, Jade, honey, did you show your father the new dress you bought for the summer festival? The silk one." Jade's face lit up. "Oh my God, yes. It was on sale for only $300. Let me go grab it." Jade jumped up from the table and ran upstairs. Diana looked at Henry, smiling sweetly. "She has such incredible taste, doesn't she, Henry? Our girls are so talented." Henry nodded vigorously, his mouth full of rice. "Yes, very talented. Beautiful dress." I sat there, completely frozen. My smile slowly died on my lips. My massive professional achievement, the result of months of blood, sweat, and tears, was completely erased by a conversation about a $300 piece of fabric. They didn't care. They truly, fundamentally did not care about me, my success, or my happiness. They only cared about the paycheck my success generated so they could keep buying their silk dresses. At that exact moment, staring at my father nodding along to Diana's meaningless chatter, the last remaining shred of my childhood illusion shattered. He wasn't a victim of Diana's manipulation anymore. He was an active participant. If you are enjoying the story so far, please take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below telling me the name of the city you are currently living in. Every single comment helps push this video out to more people, and I truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to the story. The emotional disconnect at the dinner table was painful, but it was a quiet betrayal. What I discovered 2 weeks later was a loud, explosive betrayal that finally pushed me over the edge. It was late April, right in the middle of tax season. I was sitting at the dining table on a Sunday afternoon, surrounded by piles of paperwork, trying to organize the household tax documents. Since I paid for absolutely everything, I was the one who had to sort through the mess. Diana had a habit of throwing all the mail into a messy pile under her fashion magazines. As I was digging through the stack, trying to find a specific utility bill, I noticed a thick envelope from a financial brokerage firm I didn't recognize. The envelope was already ripped open. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out the crisp, white statements inside. At first, the numbers didn't make any sense. I saw massive withdrawals listed. $5,000 here. $8,000 there. The money was being transferred directly out of the joint checking account, the exact same account I deposited my hard-earned money into every single month to cover the family's living expenses. I traced the transfers. The money was being dumped into highly speculative, incredibly risky tech penny stocks. And the worst part? The stocks had completely crashed. The statements showed a horrific downward red line. In the span of just 6 months, someone had gambled away $20,000. $20,000 of my money. The money I earned by eating instant noodles and working until midnight. I looked at the top right corner of the statement. The account holder's name was printed clearly, Diana. My vision actually tunneled. I felt sick to my stomach. She hadn't just been buying expensive milk or spa days. She had been taking the money I explicitly provided to save my father's house and using it to play day trader on the internet. And she had lost. Just then, Diana walked into the dining room, carrying a cup of herbal tea. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw what I was holding. I stood up, my hands physically shaking. I held the statement up in the air. What is this, Diana? What the hell is this? Her face went pale for exactly 1 second before the defensive mask slammed back on. She crossed her arms. I don't know why you are snooping through my private mail, Clara. That is illegal. Private mail? I yelled, my voice echoing off the kitchen walls. This is $20,000. $20,000 of my money that you blew on garbage stocks. I am working myself to the bone to keep a roof over your head, and you are gambling it away. Diana didn't back down. Instead, she stepped forward, using her favorite weapon, gaslighting. You are so dramatic. I wasn't gambling. I was investing. I was trying to grow the family wealth so we wouldn't have to rely on your miserable little handouts forever. I was doing it for the family's future. It's not my fault the market dipped. You know nothing about high-level finance. I was so stunned by her absolute lack of remorse that I couldn't speak. Just then, Henry walked into the room, drawn by the yelling. He looked at me, then at Diana, then at the papers in my hand. Dad, I pleaded, my voice breaking. She lost $20,000 of the mortgage money. She's been stealing from me. Henry looked at the floor. He shuffled his feet. He let out a long, heavy sigh. He didn't yell at Diana. He didn't demand an explanation. Instead, he looked at me and whispered, Clara, please lower your voice. The windows are open. The neighbors are going to hear you shouting. I dropped the papers on the table. He cared more about what the neighbors thought than the fact that his wife was stealing my life savings. The next morning, I drove to work in complete silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I just stared at the taillights of the cars in front of me on the freeway, feeling a profound, terrifying emptiness. The illusion was completely gone. I finally saw my family for exactly what they were. When I got to the agency, I walked straight into my office, shut the door, and completely broke down. I put my head on my desk and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. All the exhaustion, all the anger, and all the profound grief of losing my father to his own cowardice crashed over me at once. Julian, my boss, must have heard me through the thin glass walls. He gently knocked and opened the door. When he saw the state I was in, he immediately locked the door behind him, pulled up a chair, and handed me a box of tissues. He didn't push. He just sat there until I could speak. And then I poured it all out. I told him everything. I told him about the mortgage, the bills, the spoiled stepsisters, the ruined kitchen, the $20,000 lost on stock market bets, and my father's deafening silence. I told him how guilty I felt for even wanting to leave, because if I left, they would lose the house. Julian listened patiently. When I finally finished, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked me dead in the eyes. His voice was incredibly calm, but firm. Clara, he said slowly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not their daughter. You are not their sister. You are their ATM machine. What they are doing to you has a name. It is called financial abuse. Hearing someone else say the words out loud was like being struck by lightning. Financial abuse. They are using your love for your father as a weapon to extract money from you, Julian continued. And your father is letting them do it. You owe them absolutely nothing. You have already paid your debt 100 times over. It is time to save yourself, because they will bleed you completely dry until there is nothing left. He was right. Every single word was a harsh, undeniable truth. I wiped my face, feeling a new, cold resolve settling in my chest. The sad, desperate daughter died in that office chair. A cold, calculating survivor took her place. Later that afternoon, Julian called me back into his office for an official meeting. He had a sealed envelope on his desk. He handed it to me with a small smile. Your performance on the Billboard campaign was unprecedented, he said. The executive board agreed. This is your bonus. I opened the envelope. Inside was a piece of paper detailing a direct deposit. The number printed on the page made my heart skip a beat. $60,000. It was a massive performance bonus, more money than I had ever received at one time in my entire life. My immediate, conditioned instinct was to think about how many months of mortgage payments that would cover. How it could finally fix Henry's debt. But then Julian's words echoed in my head. Financial abuse. I looked up at Julian. Does anyone else know the exact amount of this bonus? Just you, me, and the payroll department, he replied. I folded the paper and put it deep into my purse. Good. Because my family is never going to see a single penny of this. The very next day, during my lunch hour, I walked to a completely different bank branch, one located 3 miles away from the agency, a bank where no one in my family had an account. I sat down with a banker and opened a brand new, highly secure private checking and savings account. I routed the entire $60,000 bonus directly there, completely bypassing the joint account Diana had access to. With that money secured, I started making moves in the shadows. I knew I couldn't just pack a suitcase and walk out after a fight. If I did that, they would guilt-trip me, harass me, and drag me back in. I needed a clean, permanent break. I needed a fortress where they couldn't reach me. I asked Julian for a recommendation, and he connected me with a discreet, highly professional real estate agent named Marcus. Marcus specialized in fast, quiet closings. Over the next 3 weeks, under the disguise of extended client lunch meetings, I drove out to Pasadena. Pasadena was beautiful, quiet, and most importantly, it was far away from the toxic wasteland of the San Fernando Valley. Within 2 weeks, thanks to my excellent credit score and the massive down payment from my bonus, I found exactly what I was looking for. A modest, beautiful 2-bedroom house with a small backyard patio. It was entirely mine. Only my name was on the deed. I signed the closing papers on a Tuesday afternoon. The heavy metal keys felt like freedom in the palm of my hand. But having a house wasn't enough. I needed to leave them with a message they could never, ever argue with. I needed to prove, with cold, hard facts, exactly what I had done for them. Every night, after the house went to sleep, I sat in the cramped guest room with my laptop screen dimmed. I opened an Excel spreadsheet. I logged into 5 years of bank history. Line by line, month by month, I documented the abuse. $2,000 for the mortgage. $400 for electricity. $300 for water. $1,500 for Haley's fake textbooks. $800 for Jade's designer shoes. The $20,000 Diana gambled away. I labeled every single transaction. I titled the document the ledger. When I finally summed up the bottom column, the total number stared back at me, glowing in the dark room. $212,450. I had handed over more than $200,000 of my youth to these parasites. Seeing the actual number made any lingering guilt instantly evaporate. Then began the physical extraction. I couldn't risk a moving truck showing up. It would cause a massive scene. So, I became a ghost. Every night, around 2 in the morning, I would quietly pack a single cardboard box. Books, winter clothes, sentimental items from my childhood. I would silently carry the box through the dark house, open the garage door manually to avoid the noise of the motor, and place the box deep in the trunk of my car. By day, I smiled. I bought their cheap groceries. I paid the internet bill. I acted like the perfect, obedient ATM machine. But by night, my room was slowly emptying out. The walls became bare. The closet became hollow. The atmosphere in the house was strangely calm, a false peace. Diana was busy planning her grand annual backyard barbecue party, completely oblivious to the fact that the foundation of her luxurious life had already packed its bags. She had no idea that a massive storm was coming, and this time, I was the one bringing the thunder. The morning of the annual family barbecue arrived with that suffocating, heavy heat that the San Fernando Valley is famous for. It was the second Saturday of July. While the rest of the house was still deep asleep, enjoying the cool air conditioning that I was paying for, I was already up at 6 o'clock in the morning. This was Diana's favorite day of the year. It was the day she got to invite all the neighbors, her superficial friends, and my father's former business associates to our backyard to show off her perfect, luxurious life. But behind the scenes, I was the one running the entire show. By 7 o'clock, I was at the local premium grocery store, pushing a heavy metal cart down the aisles. I spent nearly $400 out of my own checking account on premium racks of ribs, organic chicken breasts, expensive vegan burger patties that Haley demanded, and all the overpriced side dishes Diana insisted upon. I hauled 5 heavy bags of groceries into the trunk of my car, my back aching from the long work week I had just finished. When I got back to the house, the real manual labor began. For 6 straight hours, I stood in the sweltering heat of the backyard patio. I scrubbed the massive grill until my knuckles were raw. I marinated the meat, chopped mountains of vegetables, and set up the long rented tables with the checkered tablecloths Diana had ordered online. I arranged the expensive floral centerpieces she had delivered, making sure every single detail was picture perfect. I was sweating through my clothes, exhausted and physically drained. Around noon, Diana finally glided downstairs. She was wearing a flowing summer dress, her hair perfectly styled, smelling of expensive perfume. She walked out to the patio, holding a glass of iced lemon water. She didn't offer to help. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she adjusted a single fork on one of the tables, sighed dramatically, and said she was already exhausted from the stress of hosting such a massive event. Haley and Jade came down an hour later, completely ignoring the chaotic kitchen I was trying to clean. They grabbed a bowl of fresh fruit I had just chopped and walked out to the living room to take selfies for their social media accounts. They were treating me exactly like a hired caterer. A year ago, this blatant disrespect would have made me lock myself in the bathroom and cry from frustration. I would have felt that familiar, heavy resentment crushing my chest. But on this specific Saturday, I felt absolutely nothing. My heart was as cold and calm as ice. Because every time Diana barked an order at me, or every time Haley rolled her eyes when I asked her to move out of the way, I just reached into the deep pocket of my shorts. My fingers brushed against the heavy, cold brass key to my new house in Pasadena. The moving was already done. Over the past 3 weeks, working in the dead of night, I had systematically emptied out my life from that cramped guest room. The closet was completely bare. The drawers were empty. The only things left in that house belonging to me were the clothes on my back, a toothbrush, and a tiny duffel bag hidden in the trunk of my car, parked out on the street. They had absolutely no idea that the foundation of their perfect life was already completely gone. I smiled through the sweat, flipped another rack of ribs on the grill, and prepared myself for the final act of this miserable play. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the backyard was packed. There were about 30 guests laughing, drinking, and eating the food I had spent my entire morning preparing. The music was playing softly from the outdoor speakers. I was standing near the edge of the patio, wearing a simple sundress, quietly drinking a glass of water. I was completely exhausted, just waiting for the clock to run out. That was when Richard, an older man who used to work with my father before the business went under, walked over to the patio table where Henry, Diana, and a few other guests were sitting. Richard always liked me. He was a kind man, but he had a loud voice and zero filter. "Clara," Richard boomed, waving a beer in his hand. He walked over and clapped my father on the shoulder. "Henry, you must be incredibly proud of this girl. I was golfing with Julian from the advertising agency last week. He told me about that massive billboard campaign Clara just pulled off for the studio. He said she knocked it out of the park and just landed a massive $60,000 bonus. Incredible work, kiddo." The entire table went dead silent. The music suddenly felt way too loud. I froze, my grip tightening on my water glass. Julian wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but in the small, gossipy corporate circles of Los Angeles, secrets rarely stayed secret. I slowly turned my head to look at Diana. Her eyes were wide, practically glowing with sudden, intense greed. $60,000. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, calculating how many luxury vacations, designer bags, and useless remodeling projects that kind of money could buy. But then, the greed morphed into something much uglier. It morphed into a deep, venomous resentment. She hated that I was successful. She hated that I had something she didn't control. Diana set her wine glass down on the table with a sharp clink. She looked around at the guests, put on a condescending smirk, and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Oh, please, Richard," Diana sneered, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "Clara is practically married to her computer. It's really kind of sad. She has no social life whatsoever. But honestly, it's about time she started making some real money. She is a 33-year-old freeloader, still living under our roof, eating our food, and using our electricity." A few of Diana's superficial friends chuckled, sipping their drinks. My face burned, not with embarrassment, but with a pure, unadulterated rage that started at my toes and shot straight up to my brain. A freeloader. The woman who had literally stolen $20,000 of my money to gamble on the internet was calling me a freeloader in front of 30 people. Diana leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes locking onto mine with absolute malice. "Since you are suddenly so rich, Clara, I think it's time we talk about back rent. You can hand over that $60,000 bonus to the family account by Monday morning, or you can pack your bags and get out of my house." I looked desperately at my father. I looked at Henry, the man I had sacrificed my entire 20s and my early 30s to save. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to tell his wife to shut her mouth. I waited for him to finally, for once in 5 miserable years, defend his own daughter. Henry looked at the guests. He looked at Diana's furious face. And then, he let out a nervous, cowardly little laugh. He raised his beer bottle in the air, looking right at me. "You heard your mother, kiddo," Henry slurred, trying to play it off as a joke for the crowd. "Pay up the bonus, or get out." The table erupted into actual laughter. Haley and Jade, sitting on the lounge chairs nearby, started snickering and pointing at me. They were laughing at the ATM machine. They were laughing at the useless thing that paid for their entire existence. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, that it physically knocked the breath out of my lungs. The laughter echoed in my ears, but I didn't cry. The scared, desperate little girl inside me who just wanted her daddy's love finally closed her eyes and died. The woman who replaced her was cold, calculating, and absolutely done. I slowly placed my water glass down on the nearest table. I stood up perfectly straight, smoothing down the front of my sundress. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a tantrum. I just smiled. It was a terrifying, dead smile. "A freeloader," I repeated, my voice incredibly calm, but loud enough to cut completely through the fading laughter of the crowd. Diana rolled her eyes. "Don't start with the drama, Clara. Just transfer the money." "I am not transferring anything," I said, stepping closer to the table. The guests stopped smiling. The tension in the air suddenly became suffocating. Over the past 5 years, I have paid the $2,000 monthly mortgage on this house every single month. I have paid your electricity, your water, and your car insurance. I paid $1,500 for Haley's fake textbooks so she could go drink at a club. I paid for Jade's designer clothes. And, Diana, I paid for the $20,000 you stole from the joint account and lost playing the stock market. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Richard looked absolutely horrified. Diana's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. In total, I continued, my voice sharp as a razor blade, I have spent $212,450 keeping you all from living in a cardboard box under a freeway overpass. Check the bank records. Every single penny is documented. I looked down at my father. He was staring at me, his mouth hanging open, his beer completely forgotten in his hand. He looked small. He looked pathetic. You want me to get out, Henry? I asked softly. Consider it done. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on the silent, stunned crowd and walked through the sliding glass doors into the house. I walked straight down the hallway to the cramped guest room, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I lay on the bare mattress, listening to the muffled sounds of the party ending early, the awkward goodbyes, and the eventual screaming match between Diana and Henry downstairs. I stared at the ceiling, feeling an overwhelming, beautiful sense of lightness. The heavy chain around my neck had finally shattered. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, long before the California sun had fully risen, I quietly got out of bed. The house was completely silent. They were all passed out, sleeping off the alcohol and the shock. I walked out to the kitchen island. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag and placed it right next to the fancy espresso machine Diana loved so much. Inside the envelope was a printed copy of the spreadsheet. Every single transaction, every single bill, perfectly highlighted. On top of the spreadsheet, I left a short, handwritten letter. It only had one sentence. You wanted me out. I am out. Never contact me again. I picked up my purse, walked out the front door, and locked it behind me for the last time. I got into my car, put the key in the ignition, and drove away. As I merged onto the freeway, heading toward Pasadena, I watched the sun come up over the mountains. I rolled down the window, letting the cool morning air hit my face. I was 33 years old, and for the very first time in my adult life, I was entirely free. I arrived at my beautiful, quiet house in Pasadena just as the neighborhood was waking up. I spent a few hours unpacking my final duffel bag, making a fresh pot of coffee in my own kitchen, and listening to the absolute silence of a home that belonged only to me. Nobody was asking me for money. Nobody was complaining about the brand of milk. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, I knew they would be waking up. I knew they would be walking into the kitchen. I sat down on my living room sofa, picked up my phone, and dialed Henry's number. He answered on the very first ring. Clara. Oh my God, Clara, where are you? We read the letter, we saw the papers. His voice was shaking, high-pitched with pure panic. I cut him off. My voice was completely flat. Diana called me a freeloader. You told me to pay up or get out. So, I got out. The mortgage is due next Friday. Let's see how you pay it without the freeloader. I didn't wait for him to respond. I heard Diana screeching my name in the background, but I just pressed the red button and ended the call. Over the next 7 days, my phone became a war zone. I received exactly 45 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one, but I let the voicemails pile up just to document their descent into madness. The first few days, the voicemails from Henry were begging, pleading with me to come back, apologizing for the joke at the barbecue. By day 4, Diana started leaving messages. She was screaming, cursing me out, calling me a traitor, and demanding I pay the electricity bill because they had received a shut-off notice. Haley and Jade left messages too, whining that their credit cards were declining. It was a beautiful symphony of desperation. When ignoring their calls didn't work, they did exactly what toxic people do when they lose control. They escalated. Exactly 1 week after I left, the receptionist at my downtown Los Angeles marketing agency buzzed my office phone. Her voice was incredibly nervous. She told me my family was in the downstairs lobby and they were causing a massive scene. I took a deep breath, walked out of my office, and knocked on Julian's door. I told him what was happening. Julian didn't hesitate for a second. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked down to the lobby with me. The scene was pathetic. Henry was pacing back and forth, wringing his hands. Diana was yelling at a security guard, demanding to be led upstairs. Haley and Jade were standing in the corner, looking humiliated. When they saw me step off the elevator, Diana charged forward. "You little brat!" Diana screamed, completely ignoring the stares of my wealthy corporate clients in the lobby. "You cannot do this to us. The bank called Henry this morning. If we don't have $2,000 by tomorrow, they are starting the foreclosure process." Julian stepped firmly in front of me, using his height and his incredibly intimidating corporate presence to force Diana to take a step back. "If you raise your voice at my employee one more time, I will have the police escort you out of this building for trespassing," Julian stated, his voice like absolute ice. Diana shrank back. Henry looked at me, tears in his eyes. "Clara, please. We are family. You can't just throw us away." I stepped around Julian. I looked my father dead in the eye. I felt absolutely nothing for the man standing in front of me. Family doesn't treat people like ATMs. You threw me away 5 years ago, Henry. I just finally stopped paying for the privilege of being abused. I have a new house. I have a new life. And none of you are invited. I turned to Diana. "You wanted my bonus? You got it. It paid for the down payment on my new property. Good luck with the foreclosure." I turned my back on them and walked into the elevator. The door slid shut on Henry sobbing and Diana screaming. I went back up to my office, sat at my desk, and permanently blocked every single one of their phone numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts. The cord was finally cut. Months passed. The chaotic noise of my past life faded into a distant, unpleasant memory. I threw myself entirely into my career and into decorating my new sanctuary in Pasadena. I started sleeping 8 hours a night. I started eating at nice restaurants without meticulously checking my bank account balance first. I was healing. Of course, gossip travels fast in a family, even when you have completely removed yourself from the group chat. Through an aunt who still occasionally texted me, I heard the brutal, satisfying truth about the fallout. Without my $2,000 every month, Henry and Diana couldn't save the house. Henry was forced to drain the absolute last remaining pennies from his retirement fund just to avoid bankruptcy, but it wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. They had to sell the beautiful San Fernando Valley house at a massive loss just to cover the debts Diana had racked up. Karma delivered exactly what they deserved. Henry and Diana were forced to move into a tiny, run-down, one-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town. Because Henry's retirement was gone, Diana had no choice but to finally get a job. The woman who used to mock me for buying cheap milk is now working a minimum-wage retail job at a discount clothing store, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day, dealing with angry customers. As for Haley and Jade, the free ride came to a screeching halt. Without me to fund their VIP club nights and designer wardrobes, they were forced to face the real world. Haley actually had to get a job as a barista to pay her own phone bill, and Jade had to move in with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment, drowning in her own credit card debt. They tried to reach out to me once from a burner phone to ask for a loan. I laughed out loud and hung up. It is a beautiful, sunny Sunday morning as I sit here telling you this story. I am sitting on the back patio of my house in Pasadena. I have a fresh cup of premium coffee in my hands. The birds are singing. The neighborhood is completely peaceful. There is no screaming. There are no demands for money. There is only the sweet, incredible silence of a life that I built with my own 2 hands, a life that nobody can ever take away from me again. Looking back, walking away was the hardest but most necessary thing I have ever done. I saved myself from drowning in their toxic ocean. But sometimes, in the quiet mornings at my new house, a small thought creeps in. Was I too harsh? Am I wrong for not giving my father one last chance to apologize after I exposed the truth? Or was completely cutting them out the only way to survive? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thanks for listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more drama and life lessons. See you in the next one.